Hello, everyone. Welcome to the replay of today's session, Adapting to the New Normal, Considerations for EAP Learners in Canada. My name is Daniel Shaw, currently working at Dalhousie University. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we can adapt to the current situation, having gone through the last 2 years, whether in a physical or an online setting. Even though this session is mainly focused on EAP students, there's also a lot of applications for ESL settings as well, or even one-to-one instruction and general instruction. So hopefully there's something positive you can take away from this session. As you can see, my name is Daniel Shaw. I've been teaching English for about 11 years in the UK, in South Korea, and obviously in Canada at the moment. Most of my work and research is at the secondary and post-secondary level. And I've been in the field of EAP for the last 5 to 6 years. You'll also see a QR code on a lot of the slides. Feel free to take a look at that, where you can find out a little bit about me, connect with me, my research, my podcast, and can obviously watch this replay, which is why you're here right now. There's also a short feedback survey, which you can complete at the end. I'd really appreciate it if you'd be kind enough to just spend a couple of minutes just to fill that in. It would really help me. So let's get started. So let's time travel for a moment. Just putting my mind back to March 2020, and I'm sure a lot of us were in the same position in our various schools or our colleges. For me personally, there were a lot of faculty layoffs, so there was a lot of uncertainty, confusion, fear as well with the situation. A lot of radical syllabus changes needed. We only had a matter of a few days even to rework some syllabi, make some changes, make some edits, simplify things, and just make it as simple as possible to get through that semester, which turned out to be many, many semesters, but we'll get into that shortly. There was no dedicated LMS in place, so we did use a little bit of Brightspace, we did use a little bit of Moodle, but they weren't really integrated or set up for what we needed for a fully online model, which later became a blended model. So a lot of work had to be done there. And we were told, hey, everyone, Teams and Zoom for online classes. Here you go. Was kind of feeling a little bit like this. Okay, where do we go? Where do we begin? What should we do? So very tricky, as I'm sure it was for a lot of us. So obviously, from this moment, we switched to a new normal, which was working solely online. So just on a little personal note, here was my last in-person class, March 2020. It just only seems like yesterday. And obviously, it was quite strange, to say the least, getting my next class entirely online. Lots of smiles, lots of fun, lots of laughs. But as you can see, over time, started to get a little bit dull, boring. Students weren't really enjoying the experience at first. And again, lots and lots of looking at screens, lots of Zoom time, lots of Teams time, lots of uncertainty, worry, panic in my students, frustration. You know, this was the new normal. So what did it teach us? What did this new normal teach us? So this is really what I want to focus and talk about today. So two years and change later, what do we really take away from all of this? How did COVID-19 change the way we teach? And has its legacy affected our teaching approach? How? And how will this affect us when it comes to teaching EAP, ESL, etc.? So let's have a look at some of the main takeaways, which I'll be diving into in a little bit of detail in the session. Firstly, we recognize that a new learning environment was needed for both teachers and students. So how did we go about creating that? What steps did we take to make this new environment? A simplified syllabus creation process was needed in most cases. So initially it was quite radical, and then over time we adapted that. We had to simplify the syllabus for many reasons, which I'll explain in a few moments. How did we scale and combine an offline LMS with online or limited in-class instruction? So how did we go from fully in class to fully online to blended to back in class and all the little pieces in between? Also, we learned, or I specifically learned, that Teams, Zoom, and tech can now be strengths and not weaknesses. So a lot of things that I was taught and that my colleagues were taught as well. A lot of things we took away from this. So it was a lot. It was quite overwhelming. Oh, wow, in the words of Steve Carell. So let me talk to you now about some steps that you can take, or that you may have taken, or that you might be implementing in the future as we continue into this newer normal of back, hopefully face-to-face, and still using some good elements, some positive elements of online learning and blended learning for EAP instruction. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of planning and delivery is using agendas, weekly plans, and semester plans. Now, generally in the past, we may have just kind of given these out. We spent 10, 20, 30 minutes looking at them with students. But once we made that switch to online and subsequently back now to a semi or a fully face-to-face model, this has remained with checking regularly, reviewing regularly these weekly plans, these semester plans with students, and getting their input as well. If something isn't working in terms of the timescales, instead of pushing it through and really rushing through certain modules, we might slow them down. We might take more time on one unit. We might find one skill is, sufficient, or it's where it needs to be, so we can move that on depending on students' input as well. So this was always welcomed, especially in the online model. And as we start to shift back to a more normal scenario, we can start to get a little bit more input from students and get them to help you to deliver the best course or program possible. So secondly was rubrics. Again, usually when we give assignments, assessments, we'd take some time to look at rubrics. However, it was really important to quell that uncertainty and to minimize that fear and that worry, that we looked at these regularly with students. So I took a lot of class time to review, check, discuss, clarify what was needed for each element of the assignment. So instead of just saying, here's your assignment, let's break it down into 3 stages, 3 steps. Let's review the rubric at each step. Let's see how we can get to this stage, or get to this level, or get to the higher point or mark boundaries. How can we do that? And we reviewed that as we needed through the semester, which was really helpful. And I still find even now that students really respond well, and that they really appreciate that clarity and that breaking down that big assignment into chunks or into steps. So assignments were numbered. This might seem like a really small thing, but especially when we're dealing with non-native speakers, or maybe students whose proficiency level isn't quite where it needs to be, using numbers is great. Everyone can recognize, identify, and use numbers, and we put the percentages clearly labeled next to them. So they can see very simply assignment 1 here, 2, 3, 4, and so on. These also corresponded to the syllabus, and they address those important questions, the what questions, the why questions, the how questions. This is really key, because if I'm going to sell an assignment or a project to students, they need to know the answers to these questions. In most situations, the fact that they could connect that and see that and actually tell me what, why, and how in terms of the assignments and the way that they were structured really helped. The progress was really clear. There was much more of a cohesion, and the end result was generally much better than what I've experienced in the past when I was in my pre-2020 phase. So here's an example, very, very basic, simplified example of a one-to-one weekly plan. So again, this is just kind of for reference purposes. It's very, very vague, but I just wanted to give you an idea. So as you can see, with the student, we've identified 4 areas, 4 skills that they want to work on. And what we've done is we've gone ahead and we have just quickly marked off everything that's been done, hour by hour, the problem to solve, the objective, the assignment prior to the class, the homework after. So it's a very simplified version, but I just want you to see how you can do this. And just taking a minute, maybe 2 minutes at the beginning or the end of a class just to show where you're at can just really help students see that journey and get to the end of that journey without too much anxiety or stress or fear, because you're taking out that uncertainty by just giving them the step-by-step objective or the step-by-step element that they need to progress and to continue. So here is a rubric sample. I just mentioned rubrics a moment ago. This is, again, very basic, just something that I can show you from one of my rubrics. So again, going through what does good structure and planning look like? What does good content, originality, and research? So if we explain exactly what we're looking for as teachers and as educators, we can hopefully get our students to recognize and see, for me to score a 10 or a 5 in this section, I need to do ABC. That way, there's very little gray area. There's very little uncertainty. It should be quite simple. You can address any misconceptions or any questions or maybe misunderstandings when you're looking at these, and hopefully the outcomes will be more positive for you and also for the students who are completing these assignments. Again, here's a syllabus from an EAP course that I taught previously with more of a business focus. So as we can see, numbered assignments. Instead of saying 6 assignments with big, long, scary names, let's just break them down and we can describe them instead. Resume and cover letter, 10%. Email, APA editing, again, crucial skills for EAP, 10, 15, 10. So again, we're just breaking it down into steps. So instead of saying you have 6 assignments, we have smaller chunks, little pieces, and we can see how it all joins together. And with a short description. So students have said to me in the feedback that I've received that they prefer this because they can follow it, they can see it, it's more tangible in terms of the weightings and the numbers. Again, it's easier for communication. There's no misunderstanding between, oh, am I doing this or this? Assignment 1. Okay, I know exactly what that is because I can attach a number to it as opposed to a name or a assignment task. So hopefully that makes sense for you, but these, again, just are a few things in terms of planning and delivery. Now, in terms of filling in the gaps for learners, in that online environment, especially at the beginning, there were lots of gaps, a lot of things where students weren't clear what to do, how to do it, what they should and shouldn't be doing. It was new for all of us. So I really found that just a few tweaks could be really helpful for students. So the first one, it's pretty obvious, but it was really effective and really helped me and my students hit the ground running right from the beginning of the session or the class. So a lesson preview email was sent to students before class to provide an outline of class activities, pre-reading or texts to be covered in class, and a reminder of homework and assignment tasks. Now, back in a face-to-face setting, you might think that's not necessary, but I continue to do this just to say, all right, class, here's what we're doing today. Here's what you need. Please be aware of ABC in terms of the assignments. Great, they're here. Please bring X. Okay, it's there. The amount of time that we sometimes waste where students forget or they weren't reminded, this just takes out that level or that layer of not knowing and relying on students to be fully organized. So this was really effective. And in the same vein, a lesson review email after the class. Takes me maybe 10 minutes to write up. It's a nice way to kind of summarize your thoughts, summarize what's gone on, give the next steps, give the next session aims or the next session assignment, whatever it is. That way, again, you can keep on track. Students can keep on track. They can see, yep, I have to do this and this and this. It's clear. There's no, not really anyway, much area for debate or discussion if they fail to do that, because you've sent them that. It's accountability and it's giving them that responsibility to actually follow those steps. So here's an example. Obviously, I've just shortened it for the purpose of hiding the student information. But again, just as hello class, thanks as always for a wonderful and enjoyable class. You crushed the analysis task, and I'm happy that you're now able to analyze and reflect on outside sources, language, and structure. So again, it's just quite a general opening. But again, I've specified the analysis task specifically went really well. And now you are able to do ABC. So it's an informal way of reminding them of what they've done well in terms of the objectives. For Monday, please complete the discussion task for your participation grade. Participation grades I'll talk about. It's just a very small element that can make a really big difference in engagement, in students really checking and being detail oriented and going through what you need them to in order to give them a small grade as a kind of indicator of how well they're applying themselves to the course content. And then I've also said, please get assignment 3 from your partner to prepare you for Monday, where you'll complete assignment 4. I've put a list of partners here. So again, when they see this, it's clear to them. They know what assignment 3 is. They know what assignment 4 is. In this case, it was a peer editing task. So again, they are taking responsibility. They are the ones that are doing the work. So a little bit easier for us as teachers, but also it's great for students because they have to actually make that effort and make that engagement and push themselves to actually complete this. And it's here in black and white or in white and black, depending on the setup that you have. But again, really nice, easy way just to fill in those gaps and make sure your learners, your students are right where they need to be in terms of your classes. Now, next thing I want to talk about, pretty basic, but I think some of us, and myself included, we've stopped doing this since we went back to a face-to-face setting. And that's recordings of sessions. These became a really useful tool for students, both in audio and video forms. Now, something I always did obviously before was I provided a recording for students to review. Now, I would always create a password for that recording, which I would share with students in the class. And then I could actually see who was checking and who was coming in to watch the recording. So that really helped me in terms of monitoring progress. And I did tell my students that just in the interest of transparency. Audio version. Now on Zoom, you get a video file, you get an audio file. It doesn't hurt for you to include both of those. Some students just prefer to listen in the background while they're doing other things, while they're in the car, while they're exercising. I know a lot of students told me that worked for them. So again, just an extra tiny thing we can do, which could really make a big difference to your learners, would be in terms of this, in recording and providing both audio and video forms. Providing the slides. A PDF is fine, so they can't edit it or modify it, but it's just a nice way for them to fill in the gaps. Maybe in the lecture or the session, something wasn't clear. Maybe later on, they were trying to piece it together and something didn't quite make sense. Well, again, provide those slides. They can review, they can check. They can fill in the gaps themselves. Of course, you can prescribe maybe some areas for them to focus on, but it's giving them autonomy, it's giving them responsibility, it's helping them, giving them everything they need to succeed. And yet it might seem like a cumbersome or time-consuming thing, but really applying these things in terms of the video, the audio, and the lesson slides maybe adds 5 minutes or 10 minutes to your prep or your wrap-up. And then finally, students understood and recognized these EAP materials did not replace attendance and engagement in sessions. So by implementing participation grades, that's something I've actually stuck with since coming back to face-to-face teaching, because engagement and involvement and participation are huge things. We crave those as teachers, especially if we're in a post-secondary setting and especially in an EAP setting. So by giving them a little bit in terms of participation towards their grade, that could make a difference. And if you keep re-emphasizing that and showing the value of that engagement and how it's going to help them, not just in academic settings, but in work settings, in professional settings, then they should see the value of it, and it should help you really get more out of your sessions as well. So I found even back, like I said, in current face-to-face settings, recordings continue to add value. So that's something you could continue to do. Now we're back in this newer normal, I would call it. So again, very basic. Again, I've just blacked out the student's face just for security and just for confidentiality. So again, this is a session I delivered with a student on writing emails. So again, we're just going through, and I'm not just recording the video itself, I'm also recording the notes that we took, because these scribbles or these maybe insignificant details that you might put in a class, these can make a huge difference to a student. And it's up to you what you want to share. But again, for some students, they really, really like this and they really appreciate this. So you could help them with that as well. And then again, just to continue on this theme of filling in the gaps, tutorials and one-to-ones. Now, this was something I never did before March 2020. I didn't have the time, I was too busy, I thought. But by trying this and trialing this when I was online, because I had that flexibility to do so, this really helped me, and more importantly, helped my students massively. So what do I mean when I say tutorials or one-to-ones? Again, this is to review student and assignment progress. So in an EAP context, this allowed for me to give feedback, for me to receive feedback, to initiate collaborative discussion on learning and next steps for the rest of the semester. So if I had a 12-week semester, maybe at weeks 3, 6, 9, I'd have these tutorial sessions. And what these allowed me to do was to just bring in certain elements that we had to work on, maybe review certain skills that I understood or was told that needed more practice, give students a chance for them to lead or to teach or to collaborate on an area of research that was interesting or relevant or appropriate for them. So this helped massively because it just, like I said, filled in those gaps, made sure that students were on track. I could see where they were at, they could see where I was at, and it just helped me plan everything out. So if I had to make tweaks in weeks 4 or week 7 or weeks 10, I could do that. It just gives you a little bit more breathing space as well. So as I said, these allowed for student-led activities, group tasks, and sharing of research findings. We always made sure that before we set the one-to-ones, there was always an agenda in line with the semester plan, with time for personal reflection as well. So I'll talk about feedback a little bit later, but that's also another huge element that we can look at. So these, again, have really good applications for future life and future careers for our students. Meetings, business meetings, interviews, getting feedback, checking progress, getting them to understand, deepen their understandings, and explore new ways of thinking, new perspectives, and also to motivate each other as students as well. You know, it can be really motivating and really empowering if students get a chance to really talk about what matters to them and debate that and discuss that with others, and that they're building those skills even in a subconscious way. So these, as I said, yeah, they were really useful for informing future planning. So as I was listening, I'd always be taking notes and using those notes to help me ask students. So how would you feel next week if we did X? Or I'm going to give you a choice of 3 texts based on what you said, A, B, or C. So I'm giving them that choice as well. So here's an example where students had to present a research question. I started off by setting up the tutorial, the session, and then students would then take the lead. So they presented the research question. What was it? Why did they choose it? What perspectives or areas would they discuss? And this actually led really nicely into their assignment or their assessment, which was a switch side debate of being able to talk about different perspectives and different ways of thinking about a topic. So again, set up, and then they took the lead from that. And it was wonderful for me as a teacher, because now I know that in my face-to-face classes, I can do groupings or small paired work where they can do things like this. And I know it works. So that flexibility and that little bit of time that I had online, again, something I can implement here. So yeah, feedback is really key to these kinds of sessions. And if you get good feedback out of them, it can really help you and obviously help your students even more. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology, about how you approach your sessions now and how you might want to deliver them, and some tweaks you could make if you wish. As you've already seen, the use of QR codes can be simple, easy, and fast. You can get student input and responses, answers. This can be online, blended, face-to-face. Using a QR code here at any time, if I say to students, I want you to respond to this question, or I want your input, or let's do a quiz, the QR code's there, they scan it, they're in instantly. Well, give or take a few seconds anyway. New tools I discovered, which are now commonplace in my practice. Genially. What is Genially? This is kind of like a presentation tool. It's very interactive. You have a lot of options there. You can use this for sharing online, sharing face-to-face, as a replacement for PowerPoint maybe, or Canva. So that's a really nice tool I discovered. Menti. Menti, again, is a really nice tool for quizzes, for getting student feedback, for them to interact with certain prompts or stimuli. And Kahoot, of course, I'm sure we've all heard of Kahoot, a real hit when it comes to plenaries or review tasks. And you can also use these to get feedback as well, get responses, improve participation, and just keep the environment positive. You know, we were restricted in some ways when I was face-to-face. Students couldn't really get together and talk. They couldn't really have that level of conversation they had before. So these were a nice substitute and a nice replacement. And I'm finding even today that there's still a place for them, and they still really help me with the classes. And it's just a nice way for students to demonstrate what they've learned, give their input, give their feedback, and enjoy the process. Linktree can be an amazing way to set up your course. So again, I've set up a link tree in this presentation, which is just a nice way for students to have resources. So you could maybe set up your class or your course, and you have all the different tools there for you to help you. Okay, let me pause for a moment. So essentially what we're saying here is not tech for tech's sake, but tools you can utilize to keep your students on track, inject some interactivity, and simplify the entire semester. Hopefully that's the process. That's the aim of using these tools. Again, we don't want to just use all of them at the same time, but if we can just build in some sequentially, that can make a really big difference for your students and hopefully for you as well. So let me give you here an example of Menti. So here we can see the question that I set was, what are some of the benefits of following this process? So it was a process for writing. And as you can see, we've got all the different responses here, which is a great example for feedback for me, because it shows me that students are actually understanding the benefits of this process. And then I can also select and use some of these to help students see the value. So I can go back, well, student has said this shows X, or this shows Y. So again, we're connecting those why questions. Students can make the connection and see the value of the assignment or the process. And then hopefully that connects to the rubric, the outcomes, which should translate hypothetically into better grades. So this is a really simple activity we can do, get students to share their ideas, their thoughts, take those ideas, develop them, and push them towards the right skills that they need for assessment and for success in that program. So the next thing I want to talk about here is Google Docs and slides. I'm sure we're all familiar with these. In my experience, pre-2020, not really much use at all. Now, they're very, very common, and I try to implement them quite regularly as collaborative learning tools so that students can work together in a hybrid classroom or even in a face-to-face classroom. They can complete group assignments, assessments, and then I can actually see as a teacher, I can see the skill levels of students live. So the beauty of Google Doc, if it's collaborative, if we've got 3 or 4 students working on, let's say, a literature review or maybe a report together, I can see who's added what, who's taken out what, who's changed what, who has copied and pasted what in some cases. So this is a really nice way for me to see where students are at, and also gives them a chance to work together, share their ideas, share their learning, share their interests and passions in terms of what they care about, which is fantastic for their motivation and hopefully will help them in expressing themselves in other ways, in the other skills that are needed. Forms can also be used with feedback as well. So maybe after an assessment, if it's a group presentation perhaps, or an individual presentation, giving them a short form to fill in, they can assess and reflect on what went well, what they could improve next time. And I can also reflect on what I could do better to help them in the process in the future. So it ties into feedback forms and learner surveys, which were used both before and after the semester. This helped to gain a better understanding of gaps in delivery and to show the gaps were addressed in future planning. So at the end of the semester, I can see at the end of the semester, I can see what went well. I can see areas that I need to maybe consider or focus on for the next semester. So when I'm planning that next syllabus or I'm making tweaks and changes to that syllabus, I can better address the needs of my students and hopefully make sure that in the future, I've learned, I've listened, and I've reflected and grown. And this, again, should translate into better outcomes for students. That's what it's all about. Feedback always, the better the question, the better the response. So if I show you here a little example, this is a group task feedback form. And again, just a basic question. What skills did you learn or improve during this task? So again, we've got all these pretty much, everyone said all of the above, which for me as a teacher, wonderful that they have gained all of those. And again, did you experience any conflicts, communication problems during the process? How did you resolve them? So again, these are some responses, 23 responses. This is fantastic because this gives me a nice picture of where I'm at in terms of the assignment that I gave them. Perhaps I have to make a couple of tweaks. And in terms of them working as a team, they get to reflect on that. How was the experience for them? This is great because if we're thinking about a task-based approach, when it comes to interviews, job evaluations, group projects in a work setting, this is setting them up hopefully for success in those in the future. So here, again, this is where they grade themselves. So this question at the top with the responses talks about how would they grade themselves? So justifying their grade. So again, this is a useful skill, quite a high level skill, but something they might have to do in a real life scenario. You know, how can you justify that? How can you support that? So again, Some of them gave themselves a score for their presentation, and they said why they gave themselves that score. And you can see the responses. And then finally, just for me, just so I can know how to improve, how can I support you during the rest of the semester and during the final assignment? So lots of different responses here. I won't read them all out. They are quite numerous. But again, just a nice picture for me to see where I'm at as an educator. And these are things that we can do. They don't take much time to set up. And once they're set up, we can just tweak, refine, and improve as we continue through each semester. So let's think now that I've talked about a lot of useful things that we could maybe consider for now and what we've been through the last 2 years. So what are some considerations to make right now, going forward from May into the future? So the first thing that I think was really valuable and helped me a lot in my approach was giving students autonomy. It was kind of necessary in a lot of ways. I didn't really have a choice because of the online setting. Again, as we moved along, I was able to take a little bit more control back, but I'm comfortable now, and I hope most of us are comfortable with giving our students as much autonomy as is realistic. I achieved this through simplified curriculum, clear outcomes, flexible grading elements. So that way, students know exactly what is expected, they know exactly how to get there, and they have the tools to be able to achieve them. I'm the facilitator, I'm not the teacher so much. Here are the tools, go and make the tools and shape them and use them as you see fit. So these are the outcomes I try to follow now. This is great because it builds resilience in students. That's a really valuable skill and a really important skill they're going to need in a Canadian context. Also enhances teamwork and soft skills. So they have to make those efforts to make those conversations and ask those questions and maybe negotiate some challenges, and they become problem solvers. So instead of me just giving them the answer, they have to kind of figure out what the answer might be and work amongst each other to solve the problem collectively. So autonomy for me now is huge, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of you. Next, giving students more choice in learning and assessment. Choice is great as a student. I've been there. I know we all like to have choice. If I only have one way of doing something or only one method of doing something, it's going to be difficult. If I can't really apply myself, if I can't really motivate myself to do it that way, maybe the outcome's not so good. Now, again, because of the flexibility of being online, I had opportunities to experiment and try things and maybe give more choices where I wouldn't have perhaps before. So what I mean is options for specific lectures. So for example, in an EAP class, I have mostly marketing students. I had a couple of business management students. So I thought, okay, well, instead of just doing something that's very general, why don't I give some options and make some votes for certain lectures? So not all the time, but at the right time, give them the choice in what they learn. Give them some choice in assignment completion. Do you want to do a video? Do you want to do a podcast? Do you want to do a presentation? Again, why not give them that flexibility? Individual versus group tasks. Some students love to work alone and only alone. Some students love to work in groups and only in groups. Okay, well, if we do a trade-off and say, well, this one you can do alone. However, the next one you have to do as a group. Again, you're listening to them, you're understanding their needs. You're also giving them a choice to make. And the hope is that if you give them that choice, they will obviously respect that and hopefully pay it back in terms of good outcomes. The benefits, again, students take ownership of their learning. Okay, I made the choice to do this, so I'm going to put more effort into it. Sounds very simple, not always the case, however, but in theory, that should work. Empowers and increases motivation. Yeah, if I'm choosing a topic I really love, or I have a voice, then great, I'm more engaged. I get to choose how to complete this. I have 2 or 3 choices instead of just one. Great. The teacher is really listening to me. He obviously really cares about what I'm interested in and what matters to me. So choice, autonomy, these are 2 really important factors. And then finally, different interaction techniques. Going online, I had to learn a lot of different ways to interact with my students. These can be achieved in a few different ways. Critical questioning is one. and I just want to focus on this for a moment, critical questioning, because my questioning I always thought was fairly strong, but in an online setting, we need to also ensure that they're listening, that they are giving the attention to the screen or what is on the screen, and that they're able to maybe summarize or paraphrase or show those skills that are necessary, where maybe they could get away with it perhaps in the past in an online setting. And in a face-to-face setting, of course, we can still continue with these W questions, and we can start connecting them to real life applications. So some other interaction techniques, adopting a wider range of communication beyond just teacher-student, student-teacher, student-student. So again, activities, discussion forums, posts, wikis, all those kinds of things that are here. Class Wiki was something I trialed, which I thought was a really cool way. So instead of me putting all the content and material, a student, each class would be responsible. And the rest of the class were reliant upon that student. So the notes provided were only as good as the student leaving the notes on the wiki. So that was something I trialed, and probably something upon reflection I can do better on. But it was again, something interesting that I could try to get students interacting with the material. Discussion boards, these can be hit or miss, but again, depending on the purpose of them and how they connect to outcomes, they can be really powerful. Recorded responses. Instead of students writing a blog post, record a 1 minute or 2 minute voice note. Wonderful. I can really hear, again, because of it being an audio clip, I can really hear their thoughts, their ideas, their feelings, their emotions. Did they really follow? Did they really understand? Did they really get to that level? And peer feedback is huge. This can be done really well. I'm guilty of saying in the past it hasn't been a strength of mine, but as we've gone through online classes up to where we are now, where we're kind of back into a quasi face-to-face setting, peer feedback's amazing. Because again, you're giving students the opportunity to try those skills, to look at a rubric and say, okay, how can I get from here to here? And I generally find they really appreciate how much time and effort we put in as educators, grading and marking and giving feedback, because they've had to go through it themselves. And that's obviously a really powerful way for them to learn. So what else can we say about this situation that we're in now? The first, or the main thing I would say, is embrace technology. Use it as a friend, not a foe. So get familiar with new aspects of Google, Teams, and Zoom. It's got a lot of tools. It's changing all the time. Always make sure you're familiar with them, you're comfortable with them. Short YouTube videos, they really helped me understand how to do things. And it's amazing now. I can, share screens, do breakout rooms, use different tools for highlighting, for editing, etc. So again, that would be my advice there. Fully utilize your LMS. LMS is like Brightspace. They have so many options. They have so many tools, and we probably use 10 to 15% of them. Really take a bit of time to look into it, because if you can create a really solid, powerful, effective course on your LMS, you've done all the groundwork. You only really need to do it once, and then you can start to duplicate and tweak and refine as you go along. And try tools like Canva, again, for presentation tools, for graphics, for creating visuals. Youglish, I love this in an EAP context. Youglish gives phrases and expressions in context within a conversation or a video, and also gives the phrase or the expression in a British accent, a Canadian accent, an American accent, an Australian accent. So it's really rich for context. Ngrams is wonderful for corpus. So if you want to build those vocabulary skills in your EAP students or your ESL students, again, just a few examples here to help you. So yes, the Hoff says it well. Keep content inclusive for EAP learners. We've heard this topic of inclusivity so many times, and it's really important with our students who are in a new environment, a new setting. Things are not necessarily as simple as maybe they've appeared. They're going through culture shock. They're going through a lot of new experiences. So let's make sure that we address those needs in our instruction, in our content, and engage discussion topics on diversity, gender issues, racism, stereotypes. These are all really important ones. There's a lot more that need focus and attention too, but put that into our content. show that we do genuinely have an interest in our students, and generally they'll respond extremely well to that. And things like discrimination as well, huge things, especially in Canadian context. So make sure we're delivering those. Inclusion is really huge, especially in an EAP setting. The times when I've looked at these topics, I've had really good responses, very detailed, and I would say very personal accounts of what's happened, and students have felt comfortable to share those because that environment's there for them and everything else is in place for them. So again, a really powerful thing that we can think about and keep in the back of our mind as we move back to hopefully a newer normal. And cherry pick relevance. What do I mean by cherry pick relevance? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. With our syllabi, with our activities, with what we had pre-COVID and we have now post-COVID, let's look through those with a little bit of a tooth comb and just pick out, this would be great for a face-to-face class. This worked really well online, but how could it work in a face-to-face class? So select authentic materials. Again, I'm talking about an EAP setting. It could be for ESL settings as well. What is something that's really going to help this student in the future? How can this help them do, a professional, in a professional setting, in a work setting, etc. So select those materials. Task-based learning, focus with W questions addressed sufficiently. So again, task-based learning, put them in a situation, a real context, a real, challenge where they have to really think about how they're going to navigate it, and make sure you address those W questions. Because a student, if they have a challenge, maybe they don't want to do it. Well, show them the why, show them the what, show them the how, the where, and so on, so that they have the confidence and the motivation to be able to do this well. And follow the mantra: review, adapt, repeat. Every semester, reflect on your strengths. Think about what went well. Think about what could go better. Use your students as the barometer. They are the ones ultimately that will give you all the information you need, and seek that regular feedback for sure. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I feel a little bit like this right now. Am I online? Am I in the class? Am I 50-50? Am I 80-20? Am I 70-30? So how have our students changed? If we really break it down to the brass tacks, how have our students changed? So from what I've found and from what I've heard and from the feedback I've got and from what I've elicited from my students, many have lost a sense of consistency and a lack of rhythm in their learning. They feel like the last 2 years, it's not been a write-off, but it's just been very challenging. It's hard for them to find motivation. It's hard for them to find focus. And even now with some of my online classes, some students exhibit signs and signals of Zoom fatigue. They don't engage fully. They become distracted. And it's very easy to see when a student's not fully engaged. It just adds a little bit more difficulty and complexity to what we do. So these are considerations that we need to maybe plan for when we're back in a face-to-face setting, because this might not disappear immediately. So others have said to me they crave that face-to-face interaction. They're quite resistant to blended or online models of EAP study and ESL study as well. So how do we mitigate that? Because we're going to have some element of this. Things are not certain. We never know what's going to happen. We can't always plan exactly for the future with 100% certainty. So we need to try to mitigate that where we can. And us as teachers, as educators, how have we changed? I would say that many of us have developed and widened our skill sets and refined our pedagogy. I'm not the same teacher I was 2 years ago. I'm sure none of you watching this are. And, we're always growing. We're never the finished article. We can always learn new things, try new things. We can fail upwards and succeed in those failures and learn from our students. They're the best resource for us. And now most of us have the ability to blend, combine, and vary instruction when needed. Okay, you have to go online tomorrow. Not ideal, but I'm prepared. Okay, we have to be back in the classroom on Monday. All right, not ideal, but I'm prepared. So we've changed a lot, and we now have all these skills we didn't even think that we had. And most of us, I think, are pretty good at using technology to cater to most learners, their learning styles and needs. I gave the examples before. Some students want audio clips instead of video clips. Some want both. Some want slides. Okay, well, now I can do that. Not a problem. and it just becomes part of my practice, simply and easily. So where do we go from here? Again, we're in this very strange time. Things aren't normal. Where do we go from here as teachers, and where do we lead our students? The first thing I would say, keep an ear to the ground, more so than ever before. Listen to our learners regularly, seek and adapt to their feedback. That's going to be the most powerful tool to help us to be more effective as educators, to provide better instruction, to help deliver on those outcomes that we set for students, and make sure we just maintain really high standards. Secondly, students guide, you lead. Create a student-led environment where student input really matters. There's nothing worse when we don't feel like we're listened to, where we don't feel like we're valued, where we don't feel like we're appreciated. And if that's the case, why am I going to share a personal story? Or why am I going to answer your question? Or why am I going to put more time and effort into this assignment? So I think this is something really that we shouldn't underestimate, especially with the last 2 years in mind. Really try to listen to your students and come from a place of really genuinely trying to help them. I know we all do that, but it's more important than ever, I would say. And then keep being you. Students love you for you. Students want to be in your class because of you most of the time. Of course, it's important to get the grade, to pass the class, but most of the time, the reason they show up is because of you. So keep what works, ditch what doesn't. Try to implement new tools to add to your toolbox regularly. The more tools you have in your toolbox, the more you can adapt and flow and meet your students' needs and go where you need to go. Because ultimately, we have these goals at the end of the semester. We need to get there. Let's get there with as few speed bumps as possible. Let's make sure our passengers are happy, they have what they need, and let's make sure we get to the journey on time and we get there efficiently and effectively without any difficulty. Sounds simple, but I think you get the picture. I hope so. So I just want to say thank you for taking time to watch this presentation replay. And I'm obviously conscious of the time, so it's a little bit shorter than the actual session you may have viewed. And feel free to open my link tree, and you can press the session feedback form at the top there. It's just 3 simple questions. If you attended in person, fantastic. If you're watching the replay, no problem. Feel free to just leave a couple of questions of feedback. It really helps me, and it will really be useful for me going forward. So it's a short 3-question feedback form, and feel free to connect. I love to connect with fellow educators, fellow teachers. Networking is such a powerful tool. I'm always teaching this to my students, so let me practice what I preach. So again, there is the QR code. You can find me there. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you wish. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my podcast. So I have a podcast called ESL Talk. It is a podcast for English teachers. So this is a really, hopefully a really nice way for you to maybe learn a little bit more about certain elements of English. The latest episode is on teaching EAP and academic English, so please feel free to give that a listen. The link is in the QR code, and we're always looking for new guests. So if you have a story or something you're passionate about and would love to talk more about, feel free to reach out. We'd love to host you on the podcast. We've got quite a big following now, so it's going really well. So we'd love for you to be part of that success as well. And then finally, obviously, I do like to write about online teaching. I do like to deliver webinars and workshops on online teaching. So if this is something you're interested in, I do have a book available, Online Teaching Made Simple. I'll be more than happy to provide you a free PDF copy. So feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to give that to you. Hope you found this useful. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly. I tried my best to avoid that. And thank you all for watching, and good luck with your respective semesters. And I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.